The landscape of Iceland is remarkable under any circumstances. It looked like the land that time forgot. We got in a hire car and we hit the road from Reykjavik Airport out into the countryside.
It's a kind wind that's been sparing the culprit, but the direction has changed slightly and Icelanders are now getting a dusting.
You're seeing something that people just don't see.
A violent eruption had happened. It's rocks, it's steam, it's pretty much Armageddon.
Now look at the stuff coming off the left hand of the plume. Look at the debris there. This is as close as we dare go to this huge plume. The pilot is confident that a strong northerly wind is carrying this ash and steam away from the helicopter. I'll take his word for it. Nature's fury can be mesmerizing, but we've been playing with fire for long enough. Stay here. Can you stay?
I can't. The wind is just too strong. Okay.
Britain, an ordinary Easter weekend in April 2010.
The great bank holiday getaway is underway.
But within 48 hours, there will be chaos. 90,000 flights abandoned, travel disruption, and people stranded all over the world.
Britain is grounded tonight.
From millions of ordinary travellers.
Haven't had much sleep. Been travelling for 53 hours.
To celebrities caught up in the mayhem with no first-class get-out.
That was us finished. There was nothing more we could do. There's nowhere else that we could reach.
There was something very nerve-wracking about it, and the overriding thing was this sense of, get the fuck out of here.
Within a week, the UK is an isolated island, held to ransom by a random natural event which would ground an entire nation and most of Europe.
Sick as a parrot, I can tell you.
We're that desperate to get home that we would literally just sleep in the lounges, you know, it didn't matter if we had a bed or not, it just doesn't matter.
No airplanes in British skies, mass evacuations, and even a Dunkirk-style rescue.
Everybody needed to get home. This was a mass evacuation, the sort of thing which had never been seen in modern tourism.
Today in the UK, all seems normal. But 1,000 miles away in Iceland, something is brewing. This is Eyjafjallajökull, a 1.5-mile wide volcano surrounded by a glacier. It has laid dormant for almost 190 years. Whilst there's been some recent small activity under the surface, all appears calm. Even the scientist tasked with monitoring some of Iceland's 32 volcanoes is not anticipating any major eruptions.
The Icelandic volcanoes, they are quite varied in character and size and the type of magma that is erupted. There's actually more variety in Iceland than there is in most other places.
Professor Magnus Gudmundsson has been fascinated by volcanoes since childhood. He spent his whole career dedicated to studying their power.
We have an eruption in Iceland about once every 3 years, about 30, 35 eruptions every century. And they are reasonable eruptions, they are not just little bursts.
Iceland sits above a 25-mile crack along the ocean floor. The rift has created one of the Earth's most volcanically active areas.
Eyjafjallajökull, it is what we can call, it's not one of the usual suspects. There are other volcanoes that erupt much more frequently, but by the beginning of March, it was quite clear that something was brewing. Whether it would end with an eruption was not clear.
I have a little side hustle. I do quite like volcanology. I find it fascinating. And if I hadn't done what I'm doing now, I probably would love to have just traipsed around volcanoes my whole life. I've been following the volcanic eruption in Iceland, wondering if it was going to get worse, because I'm very aware that so much of our modern world is created so recently, so in the last 10, 20, 50 years. And we haven't had to build in the kind of resilience that you need against tsunamis, against extreme weather, against hurricanes and volcanic eruptions.
Later in the day, Eyjafjallajökull is beginning to awaken.
The team at HQ UK Met Office were continually in communication with Iceland, knowing that there was an active volcano which was rumbling. But at the time, we didn't realise that this was going to escalate as far as it did.
Of course, Iceland is one of the real hotspots of volcanic activity. And in fact, during March, we'd really been keeping our eyes on what was going on because it was unusually active. Despite hearing these rumblings from the volcano, we weren't really that concerned that anything was going to happen. It was a fairly frequent event and had never really created any reason to stop aviation in any form.
But as the evening progresses, Magnus notices changes in the volcano's behavior that are out of the ordinary.
I remember I was in my office. We found this little eruption in the night. This eruption, this flank eruption, was small by most standards. It produced a small lava flow, and it wasn't really explosive. It gets the lowest scale on this explosivity scale, which is the Y scale. Then earthquakes started to happen underneath the summit of Eyjafjallajökull. We did not really expect to see something happening at the summit.
As a travel correspondent, I'd heard rumblings about the rumblings in Iceland. And that was, talking to people in the aviation industry, they were just saying, yeah, we're not really sure what's going on here. But overnight, things took a turn for the worst.
And then these shallow earthquakes started underneath the summit crater. And that was magma moving to the surface. A pilot spotted something that looked like an eruption cloud. The eruption cloud reached a maximum of 10 kilometers. In a way, extremely privileged. You're seeing something that people just don't see most of the time. There can be decades until you see this sort of event again.
After nearly 2 centuries of slumber and months of earthquakes, tremors, and minor eruptions, Eyjafjallajökull awakes.
Most eruptions are, let's say, very powerful to start with, and then they quickly subside. That's the sort of typical Icelandic type of eruption. But this one was different. This was hot magma coming from deep. And underneath this volcano was, let's say, leftover from the previous eruptions. And that was, well, like a stale Coca-Cola. Heated that up and sort of reinvigorated it, and that is what was erupted. And in the end, we had quite a sizable eruption.
Throughout the morning, the Met Office, who are responsible for monitoring the country's weather forecasts, are feeding information to weather experts and meteorologists.
During the time that the volcano erupted in Iceland in 2010, I was working for GMTV. So Wednesday, going into work very early, as always, it's a breakfast show, and then we hear about this breaking news in Iceland, this violent eruption, which was just horrific for people living in the region. but no notion really that it would have any impacts anywhere else apart from across Iceland.
Whilst the rest of Europe and beyond had yet to hear of the volcano's explosive behaviour, local residents living in the shadow were feeling its force.
That's not the scary part, it's the sound that comes with it. That deep roaring sound, you know, it's like some demon are screaming in there, you know, that's scary.
Others close to the volcano capture on camera the epic size of the ash cloud, spewing millions of tiny fragments of volcanic rock and minerals into the air. Icelandic TV reports the eruption is also melting the surrounding glacier, forcing an emergency evacuation of around 800 people, including British schoolchildren on geography field trips in the area.
We had some crazy man banging on our door at like 4 in the morning, like, get out, and we were like running. All my house people were just screaming.
While most head away from Eyjafjallajökull, one team are attempting to get as close as they can. Veteran news correspondent John Irvine is one of the first journalists on the scene.
We got in a hire car and we hit the road from Reykjavik airport out into the countryside. The further away we got from Reykjavik, the volcano got bigger and the plume got bigger. And the landscape of Iceland is remarkable under any circumstances. It looked like the land that time forgot, replete with a volcano erupting. You know, if a woolly mammoth had walked past, it wouldn't have looked out of place.
So the Met Office oversees VAC London, which is the Volcanic Ash Advisory Centre. There are others around the world. There's one in Tokyo, there's one in Montreal. So this volcano had been rumbling for some time, and certainly the department, the team there were well aware of what was going on and were running computer models, analysing what could happen. But the worst case scenario certainly wasn't in their vision at the time. Across Britain, things were business as usual.
And nothing appears out of the ordinary in Prestwick, Scotland, where Jonathan Astill of the National Air Traffic Services, or NATS, has just clocked in for his shift.
In 2010, NATS was handling more than 2 million flights per year. To put that into context, that means somewhere between 400 and 500 flights airborne at any time within the airspace for which we are responsible. Wednesday, the 14th of April, started like any other day. I went into work as normal, and at that point, one of my duty ops managers handed me a piece of paper that had a message saying that the volcano had actually properly erupted. So nothing to worry about at that point. The volcanic plume would remain within Icelandic airspace for quite some time, we expected. I went to my meeting and just carried on as normal.
However, as the day progresses, meteorologists are receiving information from the Met Office that the fallout from the eruption is about to enter another phase.
When I started looking at the upper air, and we're talking like wind speeds right at the top of the weather-making layer of the atmosphere, they were coming in the wrong direction for the UK. They were coming from the north towards us. It was coming from Iceland towards the UK. We were actually in the firing line for something which could be pretty spectacular from space, not great if you were flying through it.
Back in Iceland, John Irvine is trying to find a helicopter pilot who will take him as close as he can to the volcano.
I can remember driving back to the hotel one day and 2 helicopters were parked there, and I literally just we went up to one of the pilots and said, you know, what's the story? Can we book a flight?
From 10 miles away, it's awe-inspiring. From 2 miles, it's intimidating. From just a few hundred yards, it's frightening.
It's a great view for you guys.
The remarkable thing about that eruption was the darkness of the ash accentuated the lightning strikes in daylight hours. Normally you only see the lightning in nighttime photographs, and we couldn't have flown that, in darkness.
Whoa, look at the lightning.
It was the size of the plume and the lightning that it generated that made it so mesmeric.
You see forks and forks of lightning quite frequently now. There's another one.
We all put on headphones and we could communicate.
This is as close as we dare go to this huge plume. The pilot is confident that a strong northerly wind is carrying this ash and steam away from the helicopter. I'll take his word for it.
We got a certain distance, and luckily for us, our timing was good. The volcano was in full flow. We'd agreed with the pilot that obviously we would stay upwind of the plume. But what he didn't know was what sort of wind vortex the eruption was creating.
We flew over lava covering the crater made by the first eruption here on March the 20th. That one finished quickly, but as the pilot made clear, what's happening now is on a completely different scale.
This is not a nice little bonfire like we had earlier. This is catastrophic. Whoa, see, look at the lightnings up there.
Nature's fury can be mesmerizing, but we'd been playing with fire for long enough.
In Prestwick, Jonathan Astill is about to face the biggest challenge of his professional career.
A little later on the day, the Volcanic Activity Advisory Centre had published one of its graphics showing where the volcanic plume was going to go. At that point, we realised it was going to have an impact on us. We'd never before experienced volcanic ash in air airspace. It's really not something we get. The ash remains in somewhere like Iceland. We don't have any volcanoes. So we had undertaken various contingency exercises, but not one for volcanic ash.
The Great Bank Holiday Getaway is underway.
Wednesday, April the 14th, 2010, and the Easter break is in full swing, with thousands of Brits heading to sunny beaches, ski slopes, and city breaks.
Easter is really the only good patch for the travel industry between Christmas and the peak summer months of July and August.
It was just that time of year. It was spring, it was the Easter holidays. Families had maybe taken their first holiday abroad in a while.
But whilst the holiday spirit is spreading across Europe, in Iceland it's a very different story.
This huge ice field shouldn't be here. These chunks of ice are evidence that part of the glacier covering the volcano was blown to smithereens.
After months of tremors and earthquakes, Eyjafjallajökull is erupting in spectacular fashion. And all eyes are on the astonishing ash cloud above it, which is soaring 6 miles up into the sky.
Unfortunately, most of what's coming out of this volcano is not molten rock landing nearby, but the fine dust that's drifting on the wind towards the rest of Europe.
And 24 hours later, it is creeping ever closer to the UK.
The issue was, we can forecast well in advance, and the forecast can be very accurate, so we can understand pathways, wind direction, even the density of ash and how it's going to fall from the sky. What is highly unpredictable is the volcano itself.
By Thursday, the growing plume of molten debris has reached Scottish airspace, creating chaos in its destructive path.
Airports across Scotland are in lockdown tonight, with all flights in and out of the country grounded.
Locals on the Shetland Islands are the first to feel the shadow of the volcano over them.
It was just a smell like bad eggs, kind of a sulphurous smell. But I had thought there was this kind of strange haze in the sky all through today.
The news reaches journalist Afia Hagen, who's visiting her hometown Glasgow, where she's been making plans for her upcoming wedding.
I live in London, from Glasgow, born and bred. My mum and dad were still there, and we were supposed to be flying home the next day. I think my initial thoughts were, well, this isn't going to affect us. Perhaps they'll figure out a way to fly round the cloud or through the cloud, or maybe realise it's not that dangerous.
But with the ash cloud threatening flights beyond Scottish airspace, Afia, like many others, is faced with the prospect of being grounded.
My initial fear was, how long is this going to last for? So is it going to be that everybody who's flying to Glasgow for the wedding can't come? What about people who are flying in from Ghana, where my heritage is from, or from London? What are they going to do?
The uncertainty spreading amongst travellers is also playing out in the boardrooms at airline companies.
My normal assumption is that things will blow over and that this would not become a significant thing. I got a call from my friend Tim Jeans, who was at the time the chief executive of Monarch Airlines. And he just said, Simon, you really need to start paying attention to this volcano, because I'm talking to my operational chaps here, and they say it's not looking particularly good.
The colossal ash cloud continues to advance across northern Britain at a height of around 33,000 feet, right into one of the busiest airspaces in the world, where up to 7,000 jets fly every day, threatening to bring with it total travel chaos.
From 5 in the morning, hour by hour, the black shape representing the ash cloud edged across the meteorological maps from Iceland toward Britain.
For planes, pilots and their passengers, volcanic ash is an extreme hazard. If it gets sucked into these giant turbines and compressed, it can effectively shut everything down mid-air.
As the crisis unfolds, forecasters are bombarded by updates.
Through Thursday, it was rolling news as this ash cloud was being picked up by this set of upper winds coming in from the northwest. Flights were being grounded across the northern half of the UK. And we realised that something which was so remote was becoming our reality.
For Prestwick's air traffic control head, Jonathan Astill, the growing ash cloud is causing unprecedented problems.
It was a kind of rolling tide effect of effective airspace closures. The first airport to close was Aberdeen, up in the northeast of Scotland. The ash cloud then came further south, affecting Edinburgh, Glasgow, Newcastle, and eventually ending up in the south of the UK. It was something we'd never before experienced and really made us all stop and think about how we were going to deal with the events that then unfurled.
Effectively, things started toppling very, 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 very quickly. And so you would suddenly hear that another block of airspace had been closed. And certainly by mid-afternoon, it was clear that things had, in the term used in the travel industry, gone very tango uniform.
Then the creeping threat from the ash cloud shuts one of the world's busiest airports, Heathrow. On an average day, it lands over 1,000 planes. But today, the last flight leaves Heathrow just before midday.
Normally you would be queuing here, one of the 180,000 passengers who use Heathrow on a typical day. But with all flights into and out of the airport cancelled, Terminal 4, like all the others, is eerily quiet.
At the time, the idea of shutting airspace down was unprecedented. No one could remember anything like it. We'd become such a mobile site, all travelling and holidays, Easter breaks. The idea that planes would suddenly stop working at the time was shocking.
With the plans of thousands of Brits abroad now thrown into disarray, the UK government is under pressure to find out exactly how the ash cloud poses a danger to air travel. The authorities turn to the scientists to provide some solid answers.
I was head of the Facility for Airborne Atmospheric Measurements. Bit of a mouthful of a job title. Our job was to gather data. So when the volcano closed the airspace and we realized that getting up there and measuring volcanic ash was something that we needed to do, we did an enormous amount of redesign of our ways of working almost overnight.
Sending a test flight into the ash cloud is a high-risk venture. But with air travel grinding to a standstill, it is the only option.
There's absolutely nothing moving now, and it's not exactly clear when they'll be flying again.
Airlines were hemorrhaging money, the government was panicking over the lack of movement and economic activity, but the sense of responsibility was enormous.
Good evening.
The science minister was Lord Adonis, and we got a message from him, and it was very blunt. It was, do the right thing, do it well, but do it quickly. Yeah, when you get direct instructions from the minister's office like that, you know people are watching you.
As Guy and his team prepare to fly into the unknown, tensions run high.
The atmosphere of the team was strange. We didn't really know what we were getting into. Nobody had done this before. We didn't really understand what the effect on the aeroplane would be. There was an awful lot of uncertainty. To a fair extent, I think we were driven to do it in this way by a sense of duty.
Apprehension among the team is understandable. A commercial jet has flown into an ash cloud before, and with catastrophic results.
My name is Eric Moody. I'm a retired British Airways 747 captain. On June the 24th, 1982, we were flying from Kuala Lumpur down to Perth in Western Australia. We were flying a Boeing 747. We had 247 passengers and 16 crew. The weather conditions for the whole trip were forecast to be fine and smooth. After about 2.5 hours, and we'd passed over the island of Java, we were up at 37,000 feet, and then it all began to happen. All of a sudden, the flight engineer says, number 4 engine's failed. He then said, number 2's gone, number 3's gone, and something like, oh goodness me, we've lost a lot. So there we were, up at 37,000 feet, out over the southeastern Indian Ocean, with no engines going. I know that none of us believed it was happening. You don't lose all 4 engines.
The crew struggled to restart the engines for a staggering 13 minutes.
If you ask me how many times we tried, I have no idea. Getting on for 100, I would think. But I looked at the poor flight engineer and I said, come on, Barry, are you bloody well trying? And with that, number 4 engine started up. And a minute and 20 seconds after that one started up, number 3 started up. We had to wait another 30 seconds later, and then 1 and 2 started up with a gigantic roar. We had no idea at all until we got that aeroplane on the ground that they were going to keep going. Coming in towards Jakarta, over the windscreen, there seemed to be a fog. It was sandblasted. It was opaque. When we got 100 feet over the runway, I said, well, we're not going to die now, lads. And the aeroplane landed. It was beautiful.
Eric only discovers later that an ash cloud from an Indonesian volcano is behind the mystery engine failure.
The next morning I got up, and there on the front of the local newspaper was Mount Galunggung Downs Jumbo. 40 years ago, there were no regulations. Nobody worried about volcanic eruptions. But you all know now that if a volcano goes off, people panic like hell. And they should, because if aeroplanes are involved, it's extremely dangerous.
The real dangers of encountering an ash cloud experienced by Eric Moody in 1982 are now grounding thousands of planes in 2010. And Guy Grattan is very much aware of the risk he's taking flying through one in the name of science.
You generally don't know with any accuracy what's coming out of the volcano because nobody wants to get close to that. We did the first flight the length of the country. It was uncanny. It was almost silent. There's just nobody on the radio. We had no other aircraft. We actually heard one aeroplane, which was a search and rescue helicopter. They were about the only thing that weren't grounded. And I remember this amazing radio call. We were heading up through the Midlands. And London Information called us up. Science One, we are aware of the nature of your mission, but we are required to advise you that you are flying into an area of high volcanic ash which may endanger your aircraft.
Three days on from the explosive eruption of the Icelandic volcano, dangerous plumes of ash are still pumping from its glacial summit. And there is no knowing when it will cease. Meanwhile, the skies above Britain are quiet, and one of the busiest airspaces in the world has been closed. Except to a team of scientists sent up to find out more on the threat the ash cloud could have on jet planes.
On the 16th, which was the last day I flew as mission scientist, we flew up and down through the ash. What we saw was layers of two things. One was layers of volcanic ash, and the other, lower down, was a layer of acid. And this was something we hadn't expected.
Guy and his team managed to land safely and complete the mission. Their findings confirm there is a real danger, but not necessarily from the ash itself.
It may well be that the level of volcanic ash wasn't actually enough to endanger the aircraft, but the amount of acid could well have caused billions of pounds worth of damage. So we were definitely right to close the airspace, but in retrospect, we might have done it for the wrong reason. We landed back at Cranfield, and it looked like half the TV crews in Britain were camped outside my office. So I did all the talking. And what I did was start by using some very plain language.
Speaking as an aeronautical engineer, I wouldn't want to be putting a big aeroplane up there at the moment. There's a lot of fairly nasty stuff there that certainly we were running away from, knowing what we could. We've got standard airline instruments on the aeroplane as well. We've got a storm scope and we've got a weather radar, and they were looking straight through it.
As the government deliberates on what to do next, across Britain, the flight cancellations are starting to cause havoc.
Britain is grounded tonight.
Today's flight's cancelled, and now they say they're not going to give us any more accommodation or any food.
I mean, it's been an absolute nightmare.
Shutting the airspace is something that's reserved for real emergencies or something you see in films, you know? It felt very, very surreal.
Runways remain eerily silent, but tens of thousands of travellers are still trying to find their way in and out of the UK. And now they take to bus, ferry, and train.
St Pancras Station in London, an extremely busy place today as passengers queued for Eurostar tickets.
An extra 50,000 people are travelling on Eurostar, and cross-channel ferries are taking 8 times more foot passengers than usual for April.
At the time the eruption happened, there were certainly more than 1 million Brits scattered across Europe. And everybody needed to get home. This was a mass evacuation, the sort of thing which had never been seen in modern tourism.
While it's not believed the ash is a serious threat to health, it is causing discomfort and disruption for hundreds of thousands of people who'll be going nowhere until tomorrow afternoon at the very earliest.
Among those desperately needing to get home are students due to take their GCSEs. And stranded teachers across Europe and beyond may not make it back in time to start the new term.
RE teacher is abroad, he's stuck abroad.
So how are you feeling about that?
A bit worried because he's a very good teacher.
There were kids wanting to get back because there's GCSEs and there's A-levels going on. The summer is revving up. You want to get back into the UK for the nice months of the year. So it was a time when people were on the move, people were travelling, and it was just a terrible time to be told you're not going back to the UK, you're stuck where you are.
As ferry and rail travel options soon dry up, tempers are starting to fray.
Sick as a parrot, I can tell you.
We're that desperate to get home that we would literally just sleep in the lounges, you know, it didn't matter if we had a bed or not, it just doesn't matter.
Desperate to get moving, travellers will do anything to beat the gridlock.
Ken Caskey and his family from Woking spent more than £8,000 travelling back from holiday in Madrid. They hired a boat to take them across the channel so his son wouldn't miss an exam.
The channel wasn't going to stop us.
Why did you think a fishing trawler was your best option home?
Because when we came here, we just saw the queues snaking out the door.
The ash cloud travel shutdown begins to spread an air of chaos and anarchy.
As soon as you're told your flight's not going, then everything flips. You go into panic mode. You know you've got to get back. Whatever you've got to do, it's really important, and you've got to go now. People were grabbing their belongings, shoving them into bags, getting a taxi, take me to a station, take me to a car rental office. We've got to get going now because otherwise we won't be able to get back. And really making a lot of very rushed and actually very expensive decisions.
As ordinary travellers panic and take matters into their own hands, it's not only ordinary Brits who are stuck. Rock legend Francis Rossi is marooned whilst on tour in Moscow. The band's visas have run out, and the production team are frantically working on an evacuation plan.
There was something very nerve-wracking about it, and we were told not to go out on the street because they'd run out again now, our visas or permits, and that someone might ask you for the permit or then ask you for your passport. Moscow, I don't know what it is, this sense of the security around the hotel, these big guys in big black suits, and there are these 5 BMWs parked in a particular way. Something's weird about it for me. So everything felt ominous, and I don't know why. The thing was this sense of, get the fuck out of here.
With options running out, the band are lucky enough to find a private jet that, having dropped a client in Moscow, is heading to Germany.
We get to make this plane, got up the steps to the plane like, thank God we're there. You know, it felt like that. And they flew us to Stuttgart, and I remember kissing the ground, and we got a bus back home, it's a touring bus, a bus back to London, which was, I just remember it being such a fantastic relief at the time.
And the world of music isn't the only industry hit. Back in London, even Iron Man is brought down to earth by the ash cloud. Producers of the sequel are forced to cancel the UK launch.
Celebrities like Gwyneth Paltrow and Robert Downey Jr. will no longer be in London for the premiere of Iron Man 2. Instead, it's moved to Los Angeles.
International sporting events are also left in disarray as the ash cloud cuts a destructive path south.
All aboard the magic bus. If flights were failing, the guaranteed route for Fulham fans on their European tour was to hit the road to Hamburg.
Football's Europa League is in its crucial semi-final stages, but the governing body UEFA refuses to cancel any games, leaving football fans on an epic overland journey.
So how long is this going to take?
Well, we reckon between us it's going to be 15 hours.
They were following their team on a 600-mile road trip, making history. Their first ever European semi-final.
Liverpool, meanwhile, have just 24 hours to get to Madrid, or they will forfeit their game. Dominic King was the Liverpool Echo's reporter travelling with the team.
We were basically told, be at Runcorn Station for 1 p.m. Runcorn Station, for anybody who's visited it, is very small, very basic.
Runcorn Station's not used to scenes like this, but after newspapers printed Liverpool's entire journey plans, it was too good an opportunity for fans to resist sending off their idols on their epic 1,200-mile journey to Madrid.
Good luck, Pepe. I'd liken it to one of those sort of school expeditions when everybody was together, because it was like, we don't know what's going to happen.
This isn't quite what these guys are used to. They're normally getting whisked through security onto a first-class jet, but today they're boarding the Eurostar to Paris, and that's only the half of it.
The first part of Liverpool's mission is to get to King's Cross, then on to Bordeaux. A journey of over 800 miles they need to do in 24 hours. Heading into France, Dominic is trying to get the latest from Rafa Benitez, the bemused Liverpool manager.
Bye-bye. And we were crammed into this tiny little carriage while the waiters were trying to serve coffee and beer. While Raf was trying to talk about a European Cup semi-final, there was a businessman having a can of Stella next to him, wondering what was going on. Rafa was looking at him, wondering what was going on.
An impromptu press conference in the buffet car later is just as surreal.
There was a picture on the Echo archives of him, the shot looking down on the carriage with all dictaphones being pointed at Rafa while he was speaking. It was another one of those moments on the trip where you're thinking, is this actually happening?
Whilst both teams made it to their matches, with Liverpool sadly losing, another sportsman, event rider Oliver Townend, is determined to get to and win the prestigious Rolex Grand Slam in the States.
Bonus of the Rolex Grand Slam on top of that, which I think was around £230,000 at the time. So for me at the time, it was pretty life-changing. Nothing would have stopped me. Nothing, no ash cloud, nothing could have stopped me getting there.
Having left Crewe Station 2 days before, and after a £1,600 taxi ride through France to Madrid, Oliver finally makes the flight to the US.
By the time I'd landed in the Kentucky Horse Park, I remember feeling absolutely knackered by the time I'd got there. And yeah, it wasn't the best place to start an event like that. The first horse went very, very well. And then I set off on my new ride, Ashdale Cruise Master, and he got to around 7 minutes and made a mistake. I thought we were on a good stride. He slightly pulled me into a fence and then quite simply didn't jump high enough. Did a full somersault, which we call a rotational fall, and landed straight on top of me. By the time I've opened my eyes again, I'm in an air ambulance to go to Kentucky Hospital. There was a very attractive nurse looking over the top of me, and I said to her, I guess I didn't win. She said, no. The event was a pure disaster. I should have listened to the bloody ash cloud.
In Britain, the government are under fire as anger rises at delays and ticket price hikes.
We come here just one touch from home, and this shower here are banging up and thinking we'll get more money to these people, making money out of people's misery. It's the worst of humanity, and it exists right here, right now.
To me, this is like a chaos and an emergency situation. And you're sort of wondering, well, fine, the elections, this could lose you the elections, guys. So, give this a bit of credence there, because you've got hundreds of thousands of Brits just stranded.
I mean, who'd be a politician? I mean, you're Gordon Brown, a volcano goes off in Iceland, your airspace is closed, and suddenly it's your fault. I mean, what's the guy supposed to do? So Of course, people blame the government when things go wrong, even when it's just not their fault. And so poor old Gordon Brown has another woe to add to his burdens.
And it isn't just stranded tourists that are pointing the finger at Westminster. It's airlines losing tens of millions of pounds a day too.
The risk is minimal, if any. It can be managed, and we don't need this blanket closure of airspace. It is a gross overreaction to a very minor risk that can be managed by taking other action.
Things were getting very serious now. The airlines were losing millions of pounds, probably by the hour. So the pressure was really on. Government, aviation authorities, air traffic control providers, tell us exactly what it is you're worried about.
Impervious to the panic and chaos happening across the world, in Iceland, Eyjafjallajökull continues to violently erupt with little sign of easing.
Here was the unpronounceable doing the unthinkable, putting humankind in its place, and showing that when it comes to brass tacks and she puts her foot down, it's Mother Nature that actually rules the world.
The 6-mile-high ash plume from the volcano's initial explosion has moved beyond the UK. But new eruptions continue to pump dangerous debris into the atmosphere.
So the ash was continually moving. It wasn't static. It wasn't just sitting over the UK. But as we continue to see this volcano erupt, more ash was coming in and replacing the ash which was overhead across northern UK.
Occasionally pockets would open where volcanic ash was no longer predicted to be. It had moved east or west, but then fairly quickly the winds would bring the volcanic ash back again. So to all intents and purposes, the airspace remained inaccessible for almost a week.
Eyjafjallajökull has been pumping around 7 million cubic meters of ash into the atmosphere every day since the 14th of April. And the debris not carried away by the northwesterly winds has begun to fall on local farms and homesteads.
These events were, of course, quite testing for the people living very close to the volcano. And during this day, it was completely dark, the whole day, to the south of the volcano. And that is never a good feeling. There's a rumbling volcano above you, and you are in complete darkness and ashes falling. But that was the situation people were in.
This is why thousands of planes are grounded. In Iceland, ash from the active volcano has covered the ground and at times blocks out the sun. A huge cloud of this ash is now drifting over Britain and our European neighbours. No one wants this stuff clogging aircraft engines.
Flights across the UK and Europe have been grounded for the third day in a row by a vast volcanic ash cloud. It is a shutdown of commercial airspace not seen since the Second World War. And for the tens of thousands stranded, no one seems to be able to help. The crisis couldn't come at a worse time for the government. Just the week before, the Prime Minister Gordon Brown had announced a general election.
But the Queen has kindly agreed to the dissolution of Parliament, and a general election will take place on May the 6th.
The long period of Labour rule was coming to an end. Gordon Brown was stumbling to the end of his term as Prime Minister. He was not very popular in the country, so it was a febrile time in politics. And I think it was clear there was big change coming.
And while the government is in disarray, so too is the rest of the country. A massive backlog means long delays to get travellers home.
At Mallorca Airport, some British tourists have been told they won't get flights home for more than a week.
You never thought, well, anything like that could happen here. The airlines, the governments were not prepared for this, and my goodness, neither was the traveller.
Whilst travellers abroad struggle to reach the UK, musician Gary Newman is struggling to leave. He's due to play a massive festival in America that he hopes will rejuvenate his career.
Well, we've been booked to go to Coachella, the festival in California. And for me, it was a really big deal. It was a way of getting back to a level in the US, which I hadn't been at for some time. And we were actually due on stage on the 18th, but we were going out a few days early. Then the flight started to be cancelled in increasing numbers.
Faced with the prospect of a total travel lockdown, continuing confusion and delays, travellers take matters into their own hands.
And another specially chartered vessel arrived in Newcastle from Norway. But these passengers paid £800 a head to be rescued.
Absolutely relieved after 36 hours of unmitigated anguish, anxiety, frustration.
As conventional modes of transport struggle to cope, Dan Snow hatches a plan of his own, inspired by World War II.
I worked on a show about Dunkirk, the evacuation of the British Army from the continent in 1940. So my mind was very much on the channel. I'd crossed the channel to and fro a few times with some wonderful old veterans and some wonderful boats that dated back to that Second World War era. A friend of mine came to me and said his wife was stuck in Europe and couldn't get back. And he wanted me to get in touch and see if we could lead another Dunkirk evacuation. Then, because I'd been filming in the channel, I got in touch with the rigid inflatable boat company that we'd been using, and they said that sounded like a great wheeze, they'd love to do it. So suddenly this plan came together. It was like a snowball. It rolled and rolled and rolled. It sounds simple, but then everything got much more complicated.
Some hitched a lift across the channel in a Dunkirk-style rescue mission.
News of Dan's rescue mission has soon spread on social media, and what was initially a plan to repatriate a friend's wife has now turned into something much more ambitious.
We were putting stuff on Facebook and Twitter, and people getting in touch and retweeting, and can you rescue me? I'm here and I'm here. And the plan was we were going to get in the boats, we were going to go back and forward, shuttling people back and forward from France, and then back to the good old White Cliffs of Dover. What could possibly go wrong? What happened when we arrived is that things started to go wrong very quickly indeed, for which I take full responsibility.
Dan's father, Peter Snow, is on the quayside at Dover to offer moral support.
The operation, we understand, just been stopped by the French police, who closed the port of Calais to Dan's boats. They say you can't come back and can't take more people away, but we hope that the 25 or so people on the boats at the moment, they will be able to get back here to Dover this afternoon, as long as they get British immigration clearance.
The port authorities did not want us there. We had no idea what was going on back in the UK. And we arrived to find the media and a sizable contingent of border force standing waiting for us. And it was clear that we'd really stirred up a bit of a hornet's nest. So it was a pretty lively day.
With the skies closed, many Brits are finding alternative transport to get home and are now arriving back after epic journeys.
Arriving at Dover after a long trek across Europe, these three travellers became stranded in Madrid, but managed, along with 50 others, to hire a coach to get them all back home.
From dawn on Monday, there was just a constant stream of people arriving, actually many of them in Belgian or French or Spanish registered rental cars. The occasional taxi from Brussels would come out of the port. A couple of really enterprising people turned up on their bikes. They were told, well, we've got a ferry, we've got room on it, but you're not allowed on there without a vehicle.
We tried to go via foot on the ferry,
but it doesn't work. We need a car, a lorry or a bike.
People were just resorting to anything to get back.
And the pressure builds for some travel companies as more and more travellers pour onto ferries and trains.
In the meantime, the cross-channel ferries chugging away between Calais and Dover have been allowed to carry more passengers than they normally do, but there is plenty of space on these boats for the last leg of a long journey home for many of the people on board.
Eurostar puts on an additional 33 trains, enabling them to carry 50,000 more grateful passengers across the Channel.
Arriving at the Eurostar terminal today, these were the fortunate ones.
Absolutely relieved, yeah. I don't want to be on the road for a while, actually.
Got through the tunnel, just thought, yeah, there's light at the other end.
The luxury cruise liner, the Celebrity Eclipse, puts its inaugural voyage celebrations on hold to rescue Brits stranded in Spain.
From across Spain, across Europe, and even across the Atlantic, this was the start of the end of a way back to Britain for 2,000 stranded tourists.
But for many, including Gary Newman, their travel plans are simply unachievable.
We had a really good tip at one point, and it seemed so, that if you can get down to Spain, you could get a flight across America from there that would bypass these clouds. So it was very, very difficult, but it had moved again. You know, the cloud just kept on moving. Then it was hopeless. There was nothing more we could do. There's nowhere else that we could reach in time. Of all the disappointments that I've had, not getting to Coachella, that's right up there, one of the biggest ones.
Alongside tourists who have found themselves in need of some Dunkirk spirit are returning soldiers too. In 2010, the UK, along with the US, was embroiled in an unpopular, long-running war in Afghanistan.
It's a sight the people of Shaul district want to be rid of. A reminder Afghanistan's still at war, and heavy armour is all that keeps the Taliban at bay.
And February saw the largest joint offensive against the Taliban to date, involving 15,000 British, American and Afghan troops.
This was the period which saw British troops deployed to Helmand, where there was heavy fighting, and saw the highest casualties that Britain would sustain in that war. And we remember the images from Wootton Bassett of these coffins arriving back in the country as the citizens would come out and pay their respects.
Soldiers on leave and some of the wounded find themselves unable to reach the UK, leaving military heads struggling to find other routes home.
On a frequency of 6625.
In response to the crisis, the government turns to the Royal Navy and launches a repatriation mission, codenamed Operation Cunningham.
She was designed as a commando carrier, but HMS Albion wasn't carrying troops into combat. She was bringing home battle-weary soldiers and footsore travellers.
The government did what it could, and it redeployed naval ships to go to particularly sort of northern Spain to rescue people. HMS Albion, the big helicopter carrier, a big ship, was able to bring lots of people back, both veterans, military, serving military, and tourists, a sort of funny mix of people on the way home.
This is one of the 3 Royal Navy vessels being used to bring back stranded Britons from the continent.
Any ships that the government had at its disposal, they would redeploy and try and use them to bring people back.
Fingers crossed we're going home in a warship. So the end of the story for these kids is just a dream come true.
While this chaotic evacuation of Europe was going on, of course, the question everybody wanted to know was, when are we going to be able to fly again? We were in uncharted territory.
Whilst many have made it home, thousands remain stranded. The cost of the crisis is now running in the billions.
We're so used to the convenience of air travel, but sitting here and looking down from one of the very few aircraft in the British sky today, I'm reminded that we live on an island. When you can't fly onto it or off it, then the rest of the world very quickly becomes much further away.
Britain and Europe have been brought to a shuddering halt. 6 days into the biggest airspace closure in aviation history, thousands of tired travellers continue to stream back into the UK via land and sea.
Haven't had much sleep. Been travelling for 53 hours.
The pressure is mounting on both air travel authorities and the government to ease restrictions.
We are doing everything we can to make the arrangements that are best for passengers. I understand the inconvenience this is causing.
As the time went on, it really became clear that we couldn't continue like this. Nobody knew when the volcano was going to stop erupting, but we couldn't at the same time ground flights for weeks, months, even years at that point.
With high-level talks taking place across the continent, the Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, calls a meeting of the Emergency Planning Committee to discuss the crisis.
We're doing everything we can. We're now going to a meeting of COBRA. There will be 5 or 6 cabinet ministers there. We're looking at every aspect, but the overriding consideration is obviously passenger safety.
The thing which was sticking was that effectively somebody in the Civil Aviation Authority, in the Department for Transport, had to sign off on, OK, it's going to be fine. And I get very much the sense that there weren't really the officials, the ministers, who particularly wanted to do that because, well, what if something goes wrong?
But there is better news from Iceland. Professor Magnus Gudmundsson sees a decrease in the volcano's activity.
There was this constant monitoring ongoing, and on the 19th of April, it sort of changed character and it got weaker.
With news of the ash cloud dispersing in Iceland, the government begin drawing up plans to open the skies. But it's not soon enough for one airline boss.
For 5 days, Europe's busiest air hub closed to traffic. And that's irritated the airlines, especially BA.
Willie Walsh, the head of British Airways, decides to tackle the government head-on.
The real masterstroke of Willie Walsh, at the time the boss of British Airways, was to order his captains to take off, to start flying towards London, to effectively dare the government to say, you're not going to land here, when clearly everybody could see, well, there's not really much of a risk.
They took off, insist BA, when the route here was safe, but the airspace over southern England never opened. And right now, we don't know where these planes will land.
With flights now heading towards the UK, the Civil Aviation Authority hold an emergency meeting and agree to new safety thresholds for flying through ash.
The new guidance allows a phased reintroduction from 2200 hours tonight of much of the airspace which is currently closed due to the volcanic ash plume over the UK.
There were a number of flights that got airborne heading for the UK before our procedures were complete, before the safety sign-off had been complete. One of the flights that got airborne early that day was the one from Seattle. Unfortunately, they had to divert into Ireland. As soon as we were able to allow flight again, that same flight was the first to land back at Heathrow.
The first British Airways passenger plane touching down at Heathrow just before 10 p.m.
This is a British Airways flight coming into Gatwick as we speak.
By Tuesday, most people who needed to get home had finally made it. With lives put on hold for one long week, normality had returned. During those 7 days in April 2010, when airspace closed across Europe, a total of 95,000 flights were cancelled, with an estimated cost to the air industry of over £1 billion.
Perhaps the consequences don't look that bad in the wake of the coronavirus, but then, we hadn't experienced such disruption before. And, one wondered how events happening hundreds, if not thousands of miles away could be so consequential for everybody in Europe.
And around 1 million Brits from all walks of life found themselves stranded abroad or grounded here.
Volcanoes go off fairly regularly. You don't often hear of them shutting down an entire continent as far as travelling is concerned, or separating continents. And so it was a fairly unique event in terms of the disruption that it was causing, and you couldn't quite believe it, you know, that there wouldn't be a way around it.
It makes you think about us and ourselves, how fragile we are and our existence is to just a small eruption out of the ground. And we're shafted, so to speak. We can't do anything.
And I think it really made people aware that, oh my gosh, yeah, we are an island nation. Actually, the world has gotten big again. We can't necessarily just fly off to these destinations that we've kind of taken for granted.
Of course it can happen again. In fact, it definitely will happen again. We are going to experience solar flares, we're going to experience earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis in the next few decades, and they will all impact Britain in some way, directly or indirectly. We got away lightly. This was a little warning shot across our bows. We are living on this little spinning bit of dirt going around a small star, and we are vulnerable to these gigantic natural shocks. We think we've built safe, comfortable, resilient societies, but the Earth knows otherwise.